Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight's story is titled, The Man in the Velvet Bandages. Let the shadows speak.
Part 1, The Quiet Semester. I never liked anatomy class. Not because of the blood or the smell of preservatives, or the fact that half our labs involved slicing into something that used to be alive. No, it was the silence that got to me. The way the air in Aldergrove Hall thickened as soon as you stepped in. How the hum of fluorescent lights seemed to dull the moment we began cutting. It felt like the building itself was holding its breath. I should have taken that as a warning. But I was 18, a freshman on scholarship at Bellwether Medical College, and desperate to prove I belonged. It was a small, private school nestled in the foggy hills of southern Oregon, the kind of place where traditions mattered and rumors clung like ivy to old brick walls. My name's Mason Hartley, and I was just a nobody kid from Wairika who wanted to become a trauma surgeon. At the time, I thought the biggest horror I'd face would be organic chemistry or pulling all-nighters before finals. I didn't know about the man with velvet bandages then. Didn't know what he was peeling off beneath his gloves, or what he was keeping in the locked drawers beneath the teaching tables. Professor Calloway arrived in October. He wasn't part of the original staff. He replaced a well-liked anatomy instructor who'd left unexpectedly after what the administration called a personal crisis. No one asked too many questions. Mr. Calloway was strange. Not grotesque, not rude, just off. He wore a gray three-piece suit that seemed to drink in the light. A dark velvet scarf coiled around his neck like a noose, and long strips of velvet were wrapped tightly around his hands and wrists like makeshift bandages. He had a slow, lilting way of speaking, like English was something he'd learned from books written a century ago. He also never blinked. I remember that because the first time he looked at me, really looked, I thought my lungs stopped working. There were only 15 of us in that class, and by November, there were only 13. The first to disappear was Lee Donahue, a quiet girl with a laugh like silver wind chimes. She didn't show up to lab one Monday morning, and we figured she'd just dropped the course. Stress was brutal in pre-med. But then her roommate filed a missing persons report. And then campus police started asking questions. And then someone found her phone, shattered, behind Aldergrove Hall, near the incinerator no one used anymore. They didn't find her. They didn't find any of them. I wish I could say I was brave back then. That I tried to help. That I knew something was wrong and followed my gut. But the truth is I was just another scared kid too afraid to speak up. Because Professor Calloway was still teaching every class, perfectly calm, while people vanished one by one. And because every time someone went missing, the classroom got cleaner, shinier, like something had been fed. Part 2, The Dissection Room. The second disappearance happened just before Thanksgiving break. Adam Firth, pre-dental, always cracking bad jokes during dissection. He once made a turkey out of lab gloves and got 2 demerits for it. But he never missed class. Until he did. No warning, no messages. His dorm room light stayed off for 2 nights straight. Then his car was found in the visitor lot, unlocked, keys still in the ignition, windshield wipers halfway up like he'd stopped mid-thought. The weird part? He was last seen heading into Aldergrove after hours. Said he needed to finish his skeletal mapping project. He never came out. Campus security reviewed the cameras, but that hallway, the one that led to our lab, had been offline that night. Maintenance issues, they said. By December, everyone was on edge. Rumors spread like spores. Lee and Adam eloped. Maybe there's a serial killer. Maybe it's just Oregon. Weird crap happens in the fog. But I noticed something worse than the whispers. Calloway was getting sharper. Not just in posture but in presence. Like he fed off the tension in the room. He started calling roll in alphabetical order, but skipping Lee and Adam without pause. Like he knew. No one challenged him. Not even me. It was just after winter midterms when I started hearing things. Scraping. Not inside the walls, but underneath the classroom floor. It happened during dissection, when scalpels scraped bone and the room was dead silent except for the occasional sniff or cough. I'd pause, pretending to clean my instruments just to hear it. Like something with claws pacing under the tiles. Something restless. I mentioned it once to Trina, my lab partner. She gave me this long look and said, "I thought I was going nuts." I hear it too. That's when I started paying attention to the floor plan. Aldergrove had 3 floors officially. 1 lecture level, 1 lab level, and the ground floor, which was mostly faculty offices. But the schematics on the emergency exit maps didn't line up. There was a 4th level, unlabeled, drawn in faded gray. It wasn't a floor so much as a hollow space between the 2nd and 3rd, sandwiched in like an afterthought. I asked about it once during office hours. Calloway looked at me without blinking and said, "Old ventilation access. Condemned. Nothing to worry about." But there was a pause before he said it. Like he'd weighed whether I was worth the truth. The last normal moment I remember from that semester was the day we dissected a fetal pig. The smell hit harder than usual, a rancid tang like meat left too long in the sun. One of the students, Hallie, gagged and had to leave. Calloway, unbothered as always, approached each table with a gloved hand behind his back, like a priest overseeing ritual. When he reached me and Trina, he paused. "Mr. Hartley," he said softly, "have you ever seen a real human dissection?" I froze. "No," I said carefully. He smiled. Or at least I think he did. It was hard to tell beneath the scarf. "There's a purity to it," he said, more to himself than to me. "A map that leads inwards. Not everyone is brave enough to follow it." Then he turned, his bandaged hand brushing the side of my table, and something about the way his fingers moved made the pig twitch. But pigs don't twitch when they're preserved in formalin. That night I dreamed of the hollow space. It wasn't a room. It was a throat. A throat made of plaster and floor tile, leading downward into something waiting, breathing, listening. I woke up to find blood on my sheets. Not a lot, just a pinprick trail from my nose like something had tried to open me while I slept and failed. The 3rd student vanished the next day. Allie. And I finally started to believe that we weren't just unlucky. Something was feeding inside Aldergrove Hall. And Professor Calloway was its priest, or worse, its creation. Part 3, The Hollow Below. I didn't go back to class after Hallie disappeared. I told the registrar I had the flu. Said I needed to quarantine, though no one was checking anymore. Too many students were leaving early for winter break, spooked by the disappearances. Bellwether's forums lit up with posts about ghosts, cults, and underground tunnels. Most were nonsense, but one thread caught my eye. It was called The Bone Room, posted anonymously. Just a single sentence. "Don't follow the vents. They lead to the hollow." That word again. Hollow. I hadn't told anyone about my dream or the blueprints, or the way Calloway's voice lingered in your skull long after he stopped speaking. So either someone else knew the truth, or something was bleeding into us all. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling vent above my bed. At 2:43 a.m. it hissed. Not the usual hum of air conditioning. This was wet. Like a breath pushed through a throat filled with spit and dust. I got up. Not because I was brave, but because the sound was moving. From the ceiling to the wall, to the floor vent, to the hallway, like something sniffing me out. I needed answers. Aldergrove was supposed to be locked at night. But the side door near the service alley didn't even creak when I pushed it open, as if someone had oiled the hinges just for me. The hallway smelled different after hours. Less bleach, more metal. Like rust on coins or the inside of a mouth. My sneakers stuck faintly to the floor as I walked. I didn't want to know why. I headed straight for the anatomy lab. Past the lecture halls. Past the janitor's closet that hadn't been opened in weeks. And that's when I saw it. A light under the floor. It flickered beneath the linoleum near the southwest corner of the lab. Faint. Orange. Like candlelight in a place where no flame belonged. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the tile. Silence. Then, a single click, like bone being split. The next morning, I cornered Trina before class. "You've seen it too," I whispered. The floor, the vent noise, the bone room. Her eyes widened. "You read the thread?" I nodded. She pulled me into an empty lecture room, locked the door, and unzipped her hoodie. Her chest was covered in bruises. Not random, symmetrical. A series of faint black circles and lines, like someone had traced surgical mapping across her ribs. Her skin bore faint pressure cuts, not deep enough to break the surface, but deliberate. "They're marking us," she whispered. "I woke up like this 2 nights ago. I think he's preparing us. Like samples." We skipped class again. That night, we returned to Aldergrove with flashlights and gloves, pretending we were brave. Trina had swiped a master keycard from the campus lost and found. It didn't get us into the hollow, but it did get us into the records office. Inside, we found something worse than monsters. We found history. Bellwether Medical wasn't always Bellwether. Back in the late 1800s, it was called the St. Alban Institute of Anatomical Research, a private anatomy school. It specialized in experimental approaches to surgical divinity, whatever that meant. Students were required to take the oath of internal reverence and consent to postmortem donation, not just of their bodies but their souls. Buried in a dusty folder labeled "Personnel Revoked" was a black and white photo. The caption read, "Dr. Thaddeus Calloway, founding anatomist, 1871. Same name, same scarf, same eyes. He hadn't aged a day. What is he?" Trina breathed. I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure he was a he anymore. Behind that file was another, just a single page. Scrawled in frantic ink, it read, "The hollow must be fed. We are only its instruments. The velvet binds not wounds but time. When the last map is drawn and the final dissection sung, the hollow will open and swallow the living whole." S.D. Wicks, interim headmaster, 1923. We stared at it in silence. Trina whispered, "We're not just students here." I replied, "We're inventory." Part 4, Below Skin Beyond Bone. The entrance wasn't behind a hidden door. It was under a sink, tucked in the far corner of Lab 3A. The sink students rarely used because the faucet was rusty and the drain gurgled like it had lungs. Trina found it. The cabinet beneath was locked with a brass latch, one too new for a building this old. When we broke it open with a crowbar, the stench hit us first, hot iron and mildew, like someone had tried to preserve meat in a church basement. Beneath the pipework, a metal hatch was embedded in the floor. It wasn't on any blueprint, but it was real, and it was open. We didn't talk. There was nothing left to say. Trina clipped her flashlight to her jacket. I took out the campus security taser I'd borrowed from my RA's dorm drawer, and we descended. The hollow wasn't a tunnel. Not exactly. It was a cavity, a surgical one. Imagine walking through the inside of a rib cage carved into the stone, where each beam above your head curved inward like bones sealing themselves. The walls were damp, marked with symmetrical incisions. The floor pulsed faintly underfoot, like something breathing beneath concrete. Trina whispered, "We're inside something." I nodded. "Or we're inside him." The first chamber was lined with desks, actual student desks, maybe 20 of them, all arranged in rows like a forgotten lecture hall. Each desk had a name carved into it. Lee Donahue, Adam Firth, Hallie Brinks, and dozens more. Each one stained dark in the center, like something had bled through the wood. In the far corner, an overhead projector flickered without a bulb, casting faint shadows that moved even when we stood still. One of those shadows turned its head. We ran. No screams. Just the sound of shoes on meat-soft floor and our breath bouncing off walls that closed too tight. The hallway curved downward, deeper, narrowing until we had to turn sideways to keep moving. And then we heard it. Not footsteps. syllables. A voice, low and rhythmic, chanting behind the wall like it was sewn inside the building itself. Incisio, separatus, revelar, a ritual, a lesson, a lullaby for something ancient. Trina grabbed my wrist. I know those words, she whispered. They're from the surgical oaths. Latin, incision, separation, revelation. I didn't ask how she knew. Some things live in your blood before you learn their names. We reached a final door. Unlike the hatch, this one wasn't metal or wood. It was stitched, skin, sewn tight with black sutures pulsing slightly like a drumhead in a womb. On it, scrawled in dark fluid, was a sentence. No student leaves without passing the final exam. Trina looked at me. This is it. I nodded. Do we cut it? She pulled a scalpel from her coat pocket. I didn't ask where she got it. The blade touched the seam, and the door shivered. Then it opened. What lay beyond was not a room. It was an auditorium, vast, dark, organic. The walls curved like the inside of a skull. Above us, hundreds of empty chairs spiraled upward into impossible black. At the center was a table, an operating table, and someone was strapped to it. It was Elijah Cortez, the transfer student who dropped out after 1 week. Everyone said he went home. But there he was, pale, unmoving, his chest open, ribs splayed like white petals. His organs had been removed, cataloged in jars labeled in a looping, archaic script. But he was still breathing. Barely. A voice rose behind us. The human body tells stories more honestly than the mouth ever will. We turned. And there stood Calloway. But not as we remembered him. His scarf was gone. His face, or what passed for one, was slick with something wet and translucent like peeled fruit under plastic. His eyes were sealed shut with thin membranes pulsing slightly. His hands were unwrapped, fingers elongated, jointless, gleaming like wet instruments. He stepped forward and the floor welcomed him, molding upward to cradle his feet. Trina raised the scalpel. He didn't flinch. I gave you both time, he said softly, to accept your place in the cycle. I stepped in front of her. What is this? What the hell are you? He tilted his head. I'm not the what. I'm the who. The hollow was built around me, not by me. I am its interpreter. Its tongue. He gestured to Elijah. And its hunger is disciplined. Scientific. We do not feed on chaos. We feed on clarity. He took another step forward. Now, Mason Hartley, shall we begin the examination? Part 5. The Tongue of the Hollow. Trina screamed, not out of fear but rage. She lunged at Calloway with the scalpel, cutting deep across his throat, or at least where a throat should have been. The blade didn't slice skin. It disappeared, sank into him like a needle into jelly. Calloway didn't flinch. His body rippled where she struck, then closed up around the steel with a sound like suction. He looked almost disappointed. Impulse, he said, his voice unbothered. The enemy of precision. Then he lifted one glistening hand and flicked it through the air. The auditorium shifted. Chairs along the bone walls creaked to life, folding down with soft metallic groans. The ceiling above vanished into a black swirl, like we were inside a pupil dilating to receive more light. Only there was no light. Just him. And us. And the table. We didn't feel our legs move. But we were standing beside Elijah now. Still strapped. Still opened. Only now, a second table was rising next to his. Empty. Waiting. Trina trembled. He's making us choose. I swallowed. Choose what? Calloway pointed to Elijah's jars, liver, heart, a chunk of what might have been brainstem, all floating in clear fluid tagged like trophies. Every body is a confession. Every organ a verse. You have two choices, contribute or translate. He pointed to the table. Lie down or read. I didn't move, but Trina did. She turned toward the jars. She picked one up, lungs pale and veined like roots in snow, and began to read the label aloud. Specimen 4B, convulsions suggest prior trauma, connective tissue unusually dense, left bronchial malformed, potential fear-bonded hypertrophy. She stopped. Her hands shook. These are not just bodies. He's been cataloging emotions. Calloway's smile widened, or maybe it was his face splitting again. It was hard to tell. What the world calls trauma, we call pattern. Your pain isn't meaningless, Mason. It's anatomical. I backed away. This is insane. He nodded gently. Yes, but so is the body. One stomach, 30 feet of intestine, a heart that breaks itself. The mind splits so it won't bleed. Do you think evolution did that on accident? He raised both arms. You were never here to learn. You were here to be learned. Then the chanting started, but not from him, from the walls. Thousands of whispering voices rose from the bone balconies. Some spoke in Latin, others in wet vowels I couldn't recognize, but they all repeated the same rhythm. Separate, observe, record. And behind that was the hollow itself, not a voice but a feeling inside my jaw, my teeth like something prying them apart to listen better. I dropped to my knees. Trina screamed again. The room spun. When I came to, I was strapped to the table. Calloway stood over me, his bandaged fingers reaching toward my chest. I struggled. He leaned down. His face hovered just inches from mine. I could see the skin on his cheek fluttering, paper-thin and wet, like it had never belonged to him. He whispered, "Do not fear the incision. It is the first true word." Then the blade touched my skin. But it didn't cut. It sang. A high-pitched frequency that shot down my spine like electricity. My body arched. Images poured through my skull. My childhood home, my mother's hands, the sound of my dog dying, all peeled away in layers like muscle from bone. The hollow wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to understand me. Suddenly, a voice inside me shouted, "You are not a map." It wasn't mine. It wasn't Trina's. But it shattered something. The blade faltered. Calloway jerked back, blinking for the first time in a century. A ripple moved across the room. The chant stopped. Then something screamed. Not in sound, in space. Like the walls themselves recoiled. I looked to the other table. Elijah was gone. Trina too. Only blood. Only a note scratched into the table metal with a scalpel tip. Not all wounds open the same. I ran. I don't remember how I got out. The tunnel, the hatch, the hallway, all blurred in a rush of fire and rot. When I collapsed on the campus lawn under the night sky, I thought I was free. I wasn't, because I still remembered, and because the hollow, once it opens, never truly closes. Part 6, After the Hollow. The college said there had been a gas leak. That's why Aldergrove Hall was sealed off with yellow tape the next morning. That's why no one could go inside and why none of the faculty would talk to reporters. That's why the semester ended early. But I knew the truth, and I knew they were lying. Because when I woke up in the infirmary, the first thing I saw was Trina's student ID card, placed neatly on my chest. Clean, untouched, and warm, like it had been in someone's hand just seconds ago. I didn't talk to anyone for 3 weeks. Not my roommate, not the dean, not the woman from the Department of Education who asked me questions with careful pauses and didn't write anything down. I only spoke to the psychiatrist they assigned me, Dr. Talbot. Middle-aged, kind eyes, soft voice. He asked about my memories. I told him the truth. Not all of it, just enough. The hollow, Calloway, the tables, the chanting. He nodded, said trauma often manifests in symbolic ways. Said it wasn't unusual for the brain to construct mythic logic around experiences it can't process. Then he asked about Trina. I said she didn't make it out. He didn't challenge me, but I could tell from the way he looked at me, he knew more than he was saying. I moved back in with my parents over the break. Small town, long roads, Nighttime felt deeper there. But I couldn't sleep. Not without the lights on. Not without the door locked and the vents covered with duct tape. Even then, I'd wake up gasping, my skin tingling like someone had traced surgical lines across my stomach while I slept. I started checking the mirror. Not for monsters, but for markings. They came back slowly. At first just faint bruises, then deeper, symmetrical patterns forming on their own, like someone was sketching blueprints beneath my skin. One night I carved one out, a small one under my collarbone. It looked like the start of a surgical diagram. I used a box cutter. The blood smelled different, like formalin. I called Dr. Talbot in a panic. He met me the next day in a diner near the old highway. Quiet place, windows facing the trees. He didn't speak for a long time after I told him. Then he took a deep breath and said, "You're not the first." I froze. "What do you mean?" He pulled something from his coat. A photograph. Grainy. Black and white. A younger version of him, standing next to Calloway. I studied under him. Back in '93. Before they changed the name of the school. Before the hollow went dormant. My throat tightened. Dormant. He nodded. It feeds in cycles. 30 years on. 30 years off. It burrows. Waits. Adapts. He slid the photo back in his pocket. You saw it too clearly. It's inside you now. It remembers you. I left the diner shaken. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My teeth ached. My gums bled every time I brushed. One night, I vomited black thread. Long, wet stitches tangled with bile. The ER said it was just foreign material ingestion, likely psychosomatic. But they didn't run blood work. Because every time a needle came near me, the machines would flicker. Then one evening I found Trina. In my room. Sitting on the edge of my bed. She looked fine. No scars. No bruises. Clean hoodie. Same chipped black nail polish. "Hey," she said like nothing happened. "Miss me?" I didn't move. I asked, "How are you here?" She smiled faintly. The hollow gave me back. Said I wasn't finished yet. I stared at her. "You're not real." She leaned forward, her voice suddenly brittle. "Neither are you, Mason. Not entirely. Not anymore." Then she was gone. No sound. No shimmer. Just her warmth, left in the dent she made on the bed. Since then, I see her everywhere. Reflections. Dreams. In the static between YouTube videos at 3 a.m. Sometimes she hums the chant. Separate. Observe. Record. Sometimes I wake up with my fingers curled around an invisible scalpel. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because the hollow is waking again. It starts with markings. With dreams about impossible rooms. With whispers in your sinus cavity when you stare too long at fluorescent lights. If you're reading this and remembering something buried in you, it may already be too late. Part 7. The Repetition Protocol. It started with a letter. Handwritten. No stamp. Just my name on the front in jagged, slanted script that looked eerily familiar. Inside was a single phrase. "There are more of us. We remember you." No return address. No explanation. But taped to the bottom was a GPS coordinate. A town 3 hours away. A place I'd never heard of. Pale Wind, Oregon. I told myself I wouldn't go. That I was done chasing shadows. But 3 nights later, I woke up in the driver's seat of my car. The engine running, hands on the wheel, GPS blinking. Arrived. I hadn't packed. I hadn't even remembered leaving. But I had driven. And something was waiting. Pale Wind wasn't on most maps. A one-road town. Fog hanging like unspoken regret. Everything smelled faintly of mildew and smoke. The address led to a decommissioned clinic. Rusted sign, boarded windows, weeds curling up the sides. But the front door was open. Inside, I found a small circle of folding chairs. 7 people. They turned to face me at once. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw that none of them had eyes. not gouged, just never there to begin with. Then they blinked, and they looked normal again. A woman stepped forward, mid-40s, dark curls, surgical scar on her neck. "Name?" she asked. "Mason," I said. "Hartley." She nodded. "You're the one from Bellwether." My stomach dropped. "Who are you?" She pointed to the others. "We're the ones who passed the test." They called themselves echoes. Not a cult. Not survivors. Witnesses. People who had been touched by the hollow in past cycles. Some as far back as the 1950s. Each of them had escaped, half changed, half forgotten. But none had healed. They met once a year. Compared dreams. Tracked deaths. Shared changes. One man removed his shirt to reveal markings across his back. Surgical sketches that pulsed faintly like living ink. Another woman said she hadn't aged in 20 years, but every week a new molar grew behind her tongue. They called these effects part of the repetition protocol. According to them, the hollow doesn't just feed. It teaches. Through exposure, recurrence, pattern reinforcement. You survive it once, it marks you. You try to forget, it reminds you. You resist, it shows you its mouth again. The velvet one is just its tongue, the woman told me. Calloway, I said. She nodded. But names aren't fixed. In 1961, he was Dr. Callowix. In 93, Professor Callan. He wears a mask stitched from memory. Always teaching. Always extracting. What does he want from us? She looked at me like I'd asked what gravity wanted. He doesn't want anything. He's not a he. The hollow doesn't speak through him. He is speech. Dissection is language. And we're all just vocabulary. They showed me a room in the back, covered in mirrors though none reflected. Each surface rippled slightly like skin under breath. Carved across the floorboards were hundreds of names, first names only, etched in tight spirals. I found Trina. I found Lee, Adam, Elijah. And then I found mine. Twice. Some people come back wrong, said a voice behind me. It was a boy. 16 maybe. His mouth had too many teeth. I came back twice. My mom says I scream in math class, but I don't remember. I backed away. He smiled without blinking. They say if you hear your name from the hollow's own lips, it grows inside you. That night, I dreamed of a classroom with no ceiling. Of Calloway writing my name over and over on the blackboard, but never in the same handwriting. And behind him, a mass with bandaged hands whispering, "There is no graduation. Only repetition." When I woke, someone had tattooed something onto my forearm. Not ink, heat. Raised letters, raw and red. Separate. Observe. Record. I drove home that morning shaking. I wanted to burn my skin off. Wanted to scream into the earth. But most of all, I wanted to go back. Not to escape, but to understand. Because the worst part of surviving the hollow isn't the pain. It's the need to go deeper. To find out what part of you it left behind. And what it's still building in your place. Part 8, the final cut. They bricked up Aldergrove Hall after the incident. No warning. No announcement. One day it was there, the next, wrapped in scaffolding and gray tarps like a corpse prepared for burial. But buildings remember. And so do I. Took me 4 months to get back inside. One of the echoes, the older woman from Pale Wind, had sent me a box in the mail. No return address, just a key with a velvet ribbon tied to it. Inside was a note. If you're going to go back in, you'll need your name. Under it was a slip of paper with a name written in cursive. Specimen M.41. Subject retained partial cognitive resistance. Vocal patterns remained intact through final suture. That was me. I was a file. I returned to Aldergrove on a fog-thick Thursday. The campus had moved on. New labs, new students. But the path to the old hall was still scorched into the soil like a scar. When I got to the door, I didn't hesitate. The key turned. The air inside smelled like warm coins and moldy breath. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The tile floors, the yellowed walls, the faint echo of shoes on linoleum. But this time, the hatch beneath sink 3A was already open, waiting. I climbed down slowly. No fear this time, only clarity. Each step I took into the hollow was like descending into a muscle, red, pulsing, ancient. The whispers started again, but they no longer scared me. They sounded familiar. They sounded like me. The table waited at the center, empty. But the auditorium was no longer deserted. Hundreds of shapes sat in the bone-carved chairs above me, silhouettes in student uniforms, their faces flickering like old projectors skipping frames. Some I recognized: Trina, Lee, Adam, even Elijah. And in the front row, Calloway, unwrapped now. His face was a hollow socket of light. No eyes, no mouth, only white fire burning inside a frame of flesh like a lantern in skin. He stood as I approached the table. "Mr. Hartley, back for extra credit?" I didn't respond. I climbed onto the table, laid down. The ceiling cracked open like a bone splitting. Above me, the hollow whispered, "Repeat, repair, reconstruct." Calloway leaned over, holding a scalpel made of light and wire. "Tell me, Mason, what do you remember?" I looked him in the face and whispered, "Everything." Then I reached into my jacket and pulled out a second scalpel, the one from Trina's locker, the one I'd kept hidden, and I drove it straight into my own chest. Pain exploded, but it wasn't pain. It was translation. My skin split not with blood, but words, sentences, diagrams, truths. The hollow recoiled. It did not expect self-dissection. It did not expect consent, because for centuries it had operated on subjects, patients, victims, but never a willing narrator, never someone who cut themselves open and said, "Here, this is what I am. Look for yourself." The lights shattered. The wall screamed. The auditorium dissolved into red ash. And then, silence. I woke up on the grass outside the ruins of Aldergrove Hall. Blood on my shirt. The scalpel gone. No wounds. No scar. Just a diagram etched faintly into my palm. A spiral of bones stitched into a perfect loop. I was alone, but not empty. I never saw Calloway again. But sometimes when I pass by anatomy books or overhear lectures at the hospital where I now work, I hear his voice beneath the words, guiding, observing. And sometimes when I touch someone, their wrist, their chest, their back, I feel the lines under their skin, the unfinished sentences, the uncut stories. So I do what I can. I observe. I record. I prepare. Because I'm no longer just a student. I'm a scribe, a witness, a vessel of what came before. And if the hollow ever opens again, I'll be ready.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.